Today is the last day for this month, but I'll be returning again in November, end of November, and I hope by that time you'll be more enlightened. So the important thing is to read these same sutras again and again so that the ideas will properly sink into the mind and also begin to think about it and maybe discuss among yourselves. And then you'll also be able to ask better questions, good questions. Just asking just for the sake of asking something, that is not a question. So it's very important to understand what is being said. Now the sutra that we have been choosing today, in a way, is a very short one. But if you look at it in another way, it is a long one.
Repetitive.
Because
repetition.
But the most important thing is this contains the essence of what we have been talking about. What we have been talking about is a different way of thinking. Now, if you study philosophy, they talk about two ways of thinking. The physical way of thinking and the metaphysical way of thinking. The physical way is to think of everything that we see, like I see some chairs here, I see a table, I see a microphone here, I see a cup here. These are things that I see. These are physical things. And today, the scientists are also talking about these physical things. The physical things, according to the scientists, there are two kinds. One is called matter, and the other is called energy. Now, those who have studied science are familiar with these two words, matter and energy. So, if you have studied chemistry, you are mainly talking about matter. Matter, and you begin to understand that matter is composed of molecules and atoms. So these studying different kinds of molecules and atoms, that is what we call chemistry. And then there is another kind of science that we call physics. And if you are studying physics, what are you talking about? Energy. In physics, you are mainly talking about energy. Different forms of energy. Heat, light, sound, electricity, magnetism. These are all energies. So, this is all physical thinking. Whether you talk about matter or whether you talk about energy, now a new science has come out which is called quantum mechanics. Quantum physics. And they are trying to analyze these things called matter and energy. And now they have come to realize that matter and energy is the same thing. You see, first they were able to find that matter can be turned into energy and energy can be turned into matter. But now they are thinking even more than that. When you look at something, when you say it is matter, but it is behaving like energy. And they begin to say that whether you see it as matter or energy is a matter of your mind. You are thinking only. It is your thinking that is going to make it look like matter or energy. So in other words, we are creating what we see. You know, last time, and several times I said this, that the Buddha is called Tathagata. Some of you may have heard this word. and maybe you are familiar with that word. But very few know the meaning of that word, Tathagata. Tat is a Sanskrit form of the English word that. That means tat. Agata means arrived. Agata means, now if you go somewhere and come back, you have return. That return is agata. Now in Sanskrit, going is called gacchati. Going is called gacchati. Coming is called agacchati. Agacchati is coming. So agata means come or arrived. So tat agata means arrived at that. Arrived at that. What does that mean? Arrived at that means he has comprehended that. What is that? What is it that you call that? Now I call that chair that chair. What does that mean? When I look at something, that thing that I am looking at is what we call that. So we have another word, that is the object. What I look at is the object, and the object is that. So when I look from here, I see you there, and I say there. That is the object. But I see that some of you are far away from here, and some are closer. How do I see that? Because I have two eyes here. If I had only one eye, if I close one eye, I can't find out whether you are far away or close. That is what is called the depth dimension. So when we see some things, there are three dimensions: length, breadth, and height. Three dimensions. Length, breadth, and height. So the world that we are aware of is a three-dimensional world. Three-dimensional world. But the problem is that our eye works like a camera. If the eye is working like a camera, when you take a picture, what the camera does is taking pictures. And when you take a picture, where is the picture? Picture is inside the camera. So when I see you as a something, picture, what I see is a picture. And that picture is not there, it is here. So when I look, if I see things, everything that I see is a picture here. So just like the camera takes the picture into a film roll, we have a film roll inside the eye, and that is what is called the retina. That thing called the retina is like the film roll that is carrying the pictures. So if that is what it is, the whole world that we are able to see is all here. This is what these people who are called quantum physicists, they are beginning to realize that everything that we see out there is really here. And the Buddha is called Tathagata, means he has arrived at, understood that so these philosophers who talk about a thing called metaphysics, they are saying there are two ways of thinking. The physics is where we are thinking of existing objects. In physics or chemistry, we are talking about existing objects. And what is the meaning of existing? To exist is to occupy space and time. So we have a thing called space and we have a thing called time. So the space we can measure by finding the length, breadth and height. That is how we measure space, length, breadth and height. That is the three dimension. But now the people, scientists talk about the thing called the four-dimensional world. What is the fourth dimension? The fourth dimension is time. So we are not only having space, we are also having time. Time means there is a past, a present, and a future. Time is to have a past, a present, and a future. So here these different dimensions, the four-dimensional world. So when we talk about matter and energy and the world, objects that are existing, existing means occupying space and time. So our normal way of thinking is to think of existing objects. And these are things that occupy space and time. But we said that these people who talk about philosophy, they say that they are talking about another thing, not physics. They are talking about metaphysics. What is the difference? Those who talk about metaphysics, they are questioning. These things that we say are existing, is that true or is it false? Are things really existing or is it just a picture in the mind? So whatever is supposed to be occupying space and time, is that real or not real? That is metaphysics. So questioning whether that is true or whether it is false. Now these people who talk about metaphysics are saying that this is all an illusion, that you are creating. The whole world that you are aware of is something that you are creating in your mind. There is a sutra in the Majjhima Nikāya, the first sutra in the Majjhima Nikāya. Majjhima Nikāya is what is called the middle length sayings of Buddha. That means those sutras, they are sutras, they are called sutra. What is the meaning of sutra? Sutra is what has been heard. The word sutta means what has been heard. And every sutra begins by saying, this is what I heard. In ancient times, there were no books and people didn't write things. They only spoke, and someone can hear what you speak. and they memorize what has been said. So, learning is memorizing. And even today, some students who go to school, they begin to memorize because there are these examinations where they ask questions, and when they ask questions, you have to give the answer. So if you have memorized what you have learned, you can give the answer very easily. But the important thing that the Buddha pointed out was, memorizing is not the important thing. Memorizing was something to be done. But the more important thing is understanding, comprehending. You have to understand. And to understand, you have to use what is called your intelligence. The understanding is more important than memorizing. But today, you don't need to memorize too much because there are books that you can write. So you can put it into writing. So when you write it down, you don't have to memorize. So you have only to understand. So things are easier. Now we have another interesting thing. We have this thing called smartphone. It's called a smartphone. that can do the memorizing also. So, the more these things happen, the less you begin to use your mind. So anyway, the most important thing that Buddha pointed out was understanding or comprehension. So it is the comprehension that really helps us, because when we have comprehended, oh, someone is tired of what I was talking about. Okay. So the important thing is, we have to not only comprehend, we have to make use of that information to change our behavior. So it's not only a matter of comprehending. The aim is to change our behavior. So changing the behavior becomes the ultimate thing. we have to remember, and for that we have to memorize, and then we have to comprehend, understand, and not only comprehend, we have to make use of it and change our behavior. Because all this is for an important reason. What is the reason? The reason is we have a problem. That problem has to be solved. If we don't solve that problem, what happens? We will be suffering. Why? What is this problem? The problem is there is something going on in life. What we call life is an activity. What we call life is an activity. And that activity is going on due to reasons. There is a reason for that activity. That means the reason is what is called a condition. When certain conditions are present, something happens. So everything is happening due to the presence of what are called the necessary conditions. When certain conditions are present, it happens. When the conditions are absent, it doesn't happen. You see, when I talk, you hear. If I don't talk, you don't hear. So, talking becomes a condition for you to hear. Everything is happening like that. Everything that happens in the world happens only due to the presence of the necessary conditions. So that means no one is doing this. You see, in ancient times, people, they didn't know much about what is going on in the world. So when there was rain, people thought, oh, the rain is because God is sending water down, maybe from heaven. So that means there is a God who is doing all these things. And so things, when there is lightning, they become frightened. Maybe God is angry. And then comes thunder, big sounds coming up. So they thought, my goodness, God is very angry. But it was very much later that people, maybe some people in the European part of the world, they were sending kites. You know, their kite is something that is floating in the air, and you have a thread. You hold the thread. The thing is, what happened was, when it begins to rain, the water begins to drop down through the thread. And water coming down through the thread is able to carry an electric current through the water. So they began to understand that there was something called electricity. And then gradually they began even to produce electricity, all based on conditions. When certain conditions are present, it happens. So when they discovered electricity, my goodness, they could create the electric bulb. Not only creating electric bulbs, they can make electric clocks, they can make electric air conditioners, fans. Now they are making even motor vehicles. They are even making airplanes. They are even making microphone, and all these things are coming from electricity. You see, what did they discover? One important law of nature. And that law is called determinism. Determinism means that every thing that happens, every occurrence is determined by the necessary conditions. When certain conditions are present, it happens. When the conditions are absent, it doesn't happen. So it is not done by anyone. You see, there is something great. So when people learned about these conditions, they thought, this is something great. Now there is no God to do things. We can do things the way we want. And therefore we can live happily ever after, because we can control the world. The problem was, that is true that people control things. But they also made that thing called a gun, which can kill the enemies. Now, if you can use a gun and kill enemies, what happens? Those enemies don't just remain, they are also going to make the gun and kill you. So started fighting. And then came what is called the First World War. Then came the Second World War. Now they are frightened that if the Third World War comes, finished. This is the problem. You see, now when I speak, you hear. Am I speaking here? Or is it happening due to the presence of the necessary conditions? This is what the Buddha discovered. Even when I speak, there is no person speaking here. And when you hear, there is no person hearing this. Everything is dependent on conditions. We are like what are called robots. We are just robots imagining that we are real people, persons. We think we are persons, but there are no persons here. This is the problem. So, when we talk about the mind, the Buddha pointed out that there is no such thing as mind. We have only the body. Now, when a child is born, it's a body that is coming out of the mother's womb. And that body is not able to think. But in the body there are eyes, ears, nose, tongue and all that. And those things called the senses or the sense organs. When something happens in the environment, one sense organ is activated. What we call light is something that is happening in the environment. It's an electromagnetic wave that comes to the eye, and the eye reacts to that. So there is what is called seeing. When we hear a sound, another thing happening in the environment, and it comes to the ears, and we hear the sound. When we smell, again something happening in the environment, and the nose is affected, and we smell. When we taste something, something happens in the environment, and that also affects the tongue, and then we get the taste. Another thing is what we call touch. That is also something happening in the environment and touching the body, and then you feel the touch. These are just physical things happening. There is another thing that happens. There are telephone wires inside your head. Wire going from the eye inside to the brain. Another wire going from the ears to the brain. Another wire coming from the nose to the brain. Another wire going from the tongue to the brain. Another wire, many wires going from the whole body to the brain. And when it comes to the brain begins to think and give meaning to what was seen, or what was heard, or what was smelled, or what was tasted, or what was touched. The meaning that you give and according to that meaning that you have given, you react emotionally. If you give the meaning, it is something pleasant, you desire it. If it is something unpleasant, you hate it. If it is something neither pleasant nor unpleasant, then you just let it be there. You see, that is your emotional reaction. That's all. And according to that emotional reaction, another thing happens. You begin to act on that. When a desire comes, you act to get what you desire. If hatred arises, then you try to get rid of what you hate. If it is fear that arises, you try to run away from what you fear. If a worry arises, then you express the worry either in crying or some other behavior like that. So everything is just happening due to the presence of the necessary condition, that's all. It is going on like that. So it's very important to understand this properly, and only when we understand this properly, that is what is called understanding the Paticca Samuppada. Paticca Samuppada is becoming aware of this whole process. And when you become aware of the whole process, you begin to see that there is no person doing anything here. And these are all happening due to the presence of the necessary conditions. Now, in this particular sutra, this is what we are discussing here. Now the sutra begins because I said this, something that you have heard. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living at Savatthi in Jetha's grove, Anathapindika's park. You know that during the time of the Buddha, there was a millionaire at that time who was also interested in helping the poor people. What is called a philanthropist, a person, a millionaire who begins to help people, philanthropist. So this was Anathapindika. The word Anathapindika means, Anatha means the helpless. Pindika means a person who feeds the helpless people. So this person built a monastery and offered to the Buddha and the disciples of the Buddha. And it was at that place that the Buddha was staying on this particular occasion. You know, it's very interesting thing happened recently. Yesterday, Saturday night, we went to that place. This place is called where?
Thera.
Yeah. Clan, that's right, clan. Thera. They had bought a piece of land and built a 3-story building. And very interesting, like Anathapindika's work. And this person, I think, is a millionaire who bought this land and built the place. So it's very good. So we went there and of course the monks chanted blessings and all that. There was a big dana and all that. And we came. So Anathapindika's park, they had a similar thing, I suppose, but not a 3-story building. It was just 1 story. But these are different places, because the Buddha didn't want 3-story buildings because he was born in a 7-story building, and he didn't want to have all the luxuries like that. So it was just 1 story here and there for the different monks, different small houses. If you have gone there, you would have seen the place. Now, of course, all broken down. You have only the bare part of it here. So, at that time, there was a monk by the name of Venerable Maha. This Maha was an Arahant. But at this time, of course, this question was asked, I think, before he became the Arahant. So he comes here and asks the Buddha a very important question. Here, there's, Venerable Sir, various views arise in the world associated either with doctrines of self or with doctrines about the world. Now, this is very important to understand these 2 things. The self and the world. So this is existential thinking. That is, we are supposed to be existing here as myself, and then the world outside. That is the subject and the object. So we think the subject is existing, and we also think the object is existing. And not only are we thinking that the subject is existing and the object is existing, we are building relationships. Either we like the object, and by liking, maybe you like so much that you begin to get married. And then you create a family. And then you begin to produce children also. You see, you are not only... You see, these are relationships. But not only that, sometimes you create enemies also. And then you begin to fight with the enemies. So all these relationships begin with this idea of existence. I am existing, you exist, and then comes the relationship. Everything, not only human beings, animals also we begin to have relationships. And not only animals, even the inanimate chairs and tables, motor vehicles, we begin to have relationships. And with the relationships comes all the suffering. You see, the suffering comes from the relationship. So it is very important to understand this. So this Maha Chunda asked the Buddha, people talk about this self and the world, and they form all kinds of concepts. Now, does the abandoning and relinquishing of those views come about in a bhikkhu who is attending only to the beginning of his meditative training? Now, this of his meditative training here is within brackets. Why is that? This is something that the translator has been putting into this. And it proves that the translator has not understood what is being said. You see? Now, attending to the beginning means not the meditative training. Understanding how this subject was constructed and how the object was constructed. That means understanding the Paticca Samuppada. These various doctrines about the self and the world comes into being through the Paticca Samuppada, which is the process of perception. Paticca Samuppada is explaining the process of perception, how you perceive. That's the important thing. So the Buddha gives a reply. Chunda, as to those various views that arise in the world, associated either with the doctrine of self or with the doctrine of the world, if the object in relation to which those views arise, which they underlie, and which they are exercised upon, is seen as it actually is, with proper wisdom. Thus, this is not mine, this am I not, this is not myself. Then the abandoning and relinquishing of these views comes about. That means that view disappears. That view about the self and the view about the world disappears. When you have properly understood it, because of the way I just explained, you should by now understand what that means. I just explained, when I am talking, am I really talking or it is happening due to the presence of the necessary conditions. If it is happening due to the presence of the necessary conditions, there is no I here. And when you hear it, there is no you there. Everything is happening without a self coming into being. This is not mine. This is not me. This is not myself. That is all that you have to see. This is not mine. This is not me. This is not myself. When you have seen that properly, that is the end of all suffering. That is what the Buddha, in very short, puts this whole thing. All that I was talking about is to explain this statement. All the things that I have been seeing, now it's almost 10 o'clock. Started at about 8 o'clock. 2 hours
No, 1
I have been talking about.
No, 1
Huh?
hour, 10 minutes.
1 hour and
10 minutes.
10 minutes. You calculated the time, huh? Yeah? Yeah? Huh?
No, let Bhante finish.
Okay, let Bhante finish.
That's okay. Well, you can use the phone and
Finish it first, Bhante.
Huh?
Bhante, you finish first.
what?
Bhante, you finish first.
Finish it.
Bhante,
You want to ask a question, no?
let Bhante finish first.
No, ask the question. No problem.
Bhante,
What is happening?
too close, Bhante, the vibration. Position. Bhante, you always teach us to.
Huh?
Bhante always taught us to see things as things happens because of the presence of necessary condition
Yeah.
due to determinism. But Bhante, and then Bhante said you have to comprehend that all things happen because of the necessary condition. Then who is the one who comprehend it? Who's the one who has direct experience that all things happen?
What is that last question? Who is the?
Bhante always taught us that to see things, all things that happen due to the necessary condition,
Yeah.
paticca samuppada.
Yeah.
And then Bhante, you say that we have to comprehend it.
Huh?
We have to comprehend the paticca samuppada, the determinism that all things happen due to the necessary condition. Then who's the one who comprehend it?
Who is the one?
Who comprehend it, to see to have a direct experience. I know it is a stupid question, but as a normal people we say, then who comprehend it? But they say we have to fully comprehend, but who comprehend it?
Well, the same question was asked
Yeah.
by asked from the Buddha, and he answered, that is a wrong question. Instead of asking who is comprehending or something, you should ask, how does that comprehension occur? What are the conditions? So that it's not done by a person. Everything is happening due to the presence of the necessary conditions.
Yeah, but who understands
Huh?
it? Who sees
What's that?
We all can come to the same.
No, the whole problem is that you find it so difficult to get out of this thinking that I am myself.
She wants to know who is the doer.
Huh?
She wants to know who is the doer, more like that. Is the
Who is the Buddha?
Somebody
It's
is
not
the
going to who see this thing, who
That
observe,
That means
who
you are the
aware,
doer. That's the
There is
doer.
no who.
awareness.
Yeah,
He's still talking about doer.
this is the problem.
You're asking about doer, he said no.
There is no person involved in this.
I understand that there's nobody involved.
What happened to the time? Did you change the time or
It's an illusion.
something? Huh?
It's an illusion.
No, recently a monk who was ordained in India came here. He was here and he was arguing with me about this same thing. He's asking who is the person who is doing this. So I pointed out that this is not a question that you are asking me. This was asked from the Buddha also. Even at that time, people were asking the same question. The thing is, there is no person to do any of these things. That's why I said we are robots. Imagining that we are people, existing people. That's the problem. And then, of course, the other part of this paper, how the Buddha points out from here a different thing. Now a person who is secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, some bhikkhus enters upon and abides in the first jhana. The first jhana, I said, jhana is the ecstasy. Ecstasy is also very important to understand that word. It is to come out of, it's like you go out of this room, you open the door and you go out and stand outside. That is the meaning of ecstasy. Ek means out, stasi means to stand. You are standing out. So in the same way, first you are tied emotionally to things. Your first thing is that you have got an emotional relationships. Maybe your wife or your husband or your children or friends and relatives, and these are all relationships. So you are tied. First thing is to get out of that relationship. And that is not just a physical thing. It's not to divorce or taking a legal thing. The important thing is mentally you have to come out of this. It's coming out of it mentally. That is what you call entering the jhana. Entering the jhana is to get out of this emotional relationship. So once you have entered the first jhana, it is like climbing a flight of steps. So you have to leave the first step to get on to the second step. And then you have to leave the second step to get on to the third step. There is also a very interesting thing that in that the temple that was constructed at Klang, there are a flight of steps. So there is also a lift that you can use to go out, but at the same time there is a flight of steps. So when I was climbing that flight of steps, I began to realize here I am leaving the first step to get into the second step, and then leaving the second step to get on to the third step. I remembered when I was a child, in that school where I was living,